Thanks for watching this clip from my new podcast, In Search of Soil. For more great clips and full episodes, check out the links in the description below.
So for somebody at home who wants to start, what's a basic recipe for compost tea? I have a bucket, I have water, I have a bubbler, I have some good quality compost. Do I need anything else?
So in any presentation, not the cheapest way you can make compost tea, you can get a bucket for free even by going to the bakery section at a grocery store and get a 3 to 5 gallon bucket. You go to a paint store, you get a $2 to $3 paint strainer bag. That's a 5 gallon bag. It has an elastic top. It fits perfectly on a bucket. It's like made for brewing. The most you're going to spend is on like a $20 to $40 aquarium pump that's going to pump air into there. And then compost. So with my quality of compost, I use 3 to 5 cups per 5 gallon brew. I'm normally more on the three cup side. You really don't need much. And then, you could do just an extract and get results from that, not add any foods. But if you want to add foods, so there's bacterial foods and there's fungal foods. The only bacterial food that I recommend or that Elaine talks about is unsulfured blackstrap molasses, which is something that you can get at the grocery store. Then fungal foods, there are different things. The main ones that I like to use are humic acid, fish hydrolysate, and then I like to either use feather meal or kelp meal or soluble kelp. And in a 5 gallon brew, I'll use a tablespoon of humic acid, possibly 2, but I don't go more than that, and a tablespoon of fish hydrolysate and a tablespoon of kelp. So I'm not doing more than 3 tablespoons altogether in the whole thing for 5 gallons. It just really needs to keep it minimal because you're working with microorganisms that are tiny, they don't need a ton of food. Most people think that more is better, but not in this case. So minimal foods. So yeah, a tablespoon humic acid, tablespoon fish hydrolysate, tablespoon kelp or feather meal. And then if I were to use a bacterial food, the unsulfured blackstrap molasses, I would only put like half to 1 teaspoon in a 5 gallon bucket. And normally you've got enough. The fish hydrolysate is going to also be food for bacteria. And we've normally got enough bacteria going in our compost that we don't really need to get that going that much more because we're trying to get other microorganisms going more. And then I've got a table that's a rule of thumb that I put together on Brew Time. So Brew Time for a compost tea really is dependent on the ambient temperature outside, which has an effect on the oxygen in the air as well. So in the springtime, in March and April, when I've got cooler temps and it's getting down to 35, 45 at night, but then in the daytime, it's getting up to 65, 70 degrees, I'm brewing for 2.5 to 3 days to get to peak population. In the summertime, it's a lot hotter. The microorganisms are more active anyway. It will take, in the middle of the summer, I don't normally brew in the middle of the summer, but in the beginning of summer, say, it's only going to take, if it's 75 at night, 95 during the day, it's going to take only, 24 hours to brew. And because of that, you're trying to get to a peak population. So the population of microorganisms are growing. You hit a peak population, and then all of a sudden they've run out of food and they've used up all the air, even if you may have been oxygenating it, and you quickly go anaerobic. And so it's a matter of hitting that peak population. And the problem that many people have is that they're brewing for too long, and then you're getting those anaerobic microorganisms going. If you ever need to err on the side of brewing for too short. So if you think it's too hot out, brew for just a few hours. Like I said, that guy in Pennsylvania, we weren't even using foods for micro, we were using extracts, so we weren't increasing the populations, and that was 5 gallons per acre, and he was getting results. So if you need to err on the side of being not brewing long enough, or what you think would be long enough.
Is there a visual cue for brewing too long?
There's not. Um, a lot of people think it's great to like see foam in compost tea. Like foam really doesn't have anything to do necessarily with microorganisms. Yes, they do create a little bit of foam through their reproduction, but not the kind of things that I see people on YouTube videos talking about. It's normally because you've got a thick substance like fish hydrolysate that's getting air pumped up through it. So like just when you're a little kid and blowing on milk, blowing in your glass of milk and creating bubbles, it's kind of that same thing. The only cue that I have noticed is once you start to get this, the only way I can describe it is a wet straw smell. So it's kind of a gross smell if you've smelled straw that's sat around wet. Once you start to hit that, I would say you're either at peak population or you need to use it then. If there are cues that it's gone bad. If you smell anything bad, so same thing with a compost pile. Our noses are meant to detect bad things, and we can rely on our own devices. So if you smell something that is very off-putting to you, it's going to be off-putting to the microorganisms, especially because they're a lot more sensitive than we are. So in a compost tea, if you smell like a manure smell, it's definitely gone anaerobic and you probably don't want to use it. Another thing I do need to mention is that compost tea is made with compost. If you put soil, and because people get this idea, oh, I need a fungal dominant brew, so they'll take what they know is fungal dominant soil and put it in your brew. And I can't say I haven't done that. Yes, I have. But you're taking the chance that there might be a pest or disease in that soil that hasn't gone through the composting process. Using pathogens into your brew. So in that same sense, I believe it was Penn State that did, I think it was in the 90s, it was either in the 90s or early 2000s, and that did compost tea experiments and research, but they were using manure. Manure is not compost, manure is manure. So they were making manure tea and breeding E. coli and stuff like that. So these people who are introducing bat guanos and stuff like that, I'm not necessarily saying you're going to get bad stuff, but that's not necessarily a strictly compost tea. Compost tea is using compost. And I apologize, but I meant to touch on this briefly way back in the conversation, but you had mentioned cold composting. I just want to mention this real quick. The reason that we want to get up to temperature on a compost pile and go through what are called PFRPs, practices that reduce pathogens, is because those hot temperatures kill pathogens and weed seeds. And so that's the benefit of having a hot composting process, is because we're hopefully killing all the pathogens and weed seeds that are in that. In that same sense with the smell, if you've got a compost pile that you smell ammonia, you're losing your nitrogen in the nitrogen that's in, not all the nitrogen, but the nitrogen or the stuff that you smell, you're losing so much of that nitrogen as a gas form of ammonia. And so the nitrogen that you should be keeping in your product is getting lost in a gaseous form, as well as that compost is going anaerobic. Or if you get like a sulfur smell, that's also going to be, I can't think of the nutrient that it is, but you're losing that nutrient in a gaseous form. So anytime you smell something bad, you're not only losing nutrients, your pile has gone anaerobic and you need to get air immediately into there.
Thanks for watching this clip from my new podcast, In Search of Soil. For more great clips and full episodes, check out the links in the description below.